Okay, so last lecture we were just starting into the idea of ecology and looking at the field, what it is, what ecologists do, and then some of the factors associated with studying individuals and population ecology. We left off with dispersal. How you get your kids away from you is incredibly important for populations to continue to be successful. Can you colonize new habitats, not habits? Can you colonize new ecosystems? That's success. Spreading your seeds, pushing your offspring into new territories is what is defined as success in nature. The longer the population exists, the more successful it's usually considered. That is ecological success. So we were talking about how plants do this. Well, think about animals. In the animal world, dispersal can be done by force. Okay, the wolf pack has too many individuals in it. The young are forced out, especially the young males. Go get a new territory. Go find a new community. Go start a new population somewhere else. And that's in some species. Other species, especially in the marine environment, or the aquatic, because we can see this in certain freshwater environments, the water current plays an incredibly important factor in animal dispersal. And we're going to talk about this. And right now you may think, well, that's just kind of stupid. What do you mean water current? This is a huge factor when we talk about conservation and we talk about marine protected areas. And we look at how do we grow populations in the aquatic world. You have to know the direction of the water current. So just making this real easy and real quick, just kind of, this is your little appetizer about this topic. If your water current is moving this way and let's say you're dealing with lobsters and you protect this area, here's where all your lobsters, use your imagination, I can't draw. These are supposed to be your lobsters. Well, when lobsters reproduce, all their offspring are going to get washed down current. So you protect this area and you make this area open for fishing because this is where the extra from the population will go. You have to know this. If you don't, and you say, well, let's protect over here and let people fish over here, they're not going to be happy because they're not going to catch any fish. They're not going to catch any lobsters. So understanding how individuals get dispersed in populations is very, very important. Think about how viruses spread. Well, virus is carried by a host, and if you know the dispersal of the host, you can understand how the viral population will get dispersed. Think about our current situation with any viral health issue or even bacterial health issue where you have parasites attached to hosts. The dispersal of the host influences the parasite population. Okay, so again, hopefully the big picture things are starting to come together and you're like, yeah, he did say something about that before, and oh, I do remember a little bit about that, and so on and so on. Now, what's interesting is when we look at the dispersal patterns in nature, they're what we call fluid. They're constantly changing. Dispersal patterns, or we could call them distribution patterns. Let's put that up here as well. Those terms get interchanged, dispersal, distribution. Basically, how are your individuals spread out in the community? These patterns change. They change, let me insert this, they change based upon a whole wide range of factors. So things that can cause patterns to change. Let's just go abiotic. Factors, temperature, pH, salinity, etc. The population size. As your population gets bigger, dispersal changes versus a smaller population, predators, resources, and just give it the big etc. So these patterns are not fixed. Please do not think that. You look at a pattern and you see a pattern in the spring for a certain population. By summer, that pattern may be different. By fall, it may change, or it may change every so many years as a community changes. The dispersal pattern changes over 5 or 15 or 20 years. Wow, I used to see these squirrels in my front yard, but now I don't anymore. Years ago, they were here. Why did that pattern change? Okay. So in general, though, there are 3 patterns of dispersal in a community. The first pattern is called clumped. Oh, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. So clumped distribution or clumped dispersal. Individuals tend to be grouped around resources. Ooh, there's a lot of food here. Let's concentrate around it. Think about those of you who are fishing. You find your sweet spot and you fish in that same spot and you catch fish a lot of times. The saying 90% of the fish are in 10% of the lake because they're clumped around the resources right there. The resources could be that spot provides protection for the fish. It provides shelter. Maybe it's where there's food. Who knows? We're not underwater with the fish, but there's something about that location that the fish clump around that location. Now, again, that could change. Last year, wow, I used to catch fish by this tree all the time. Now, nothing. What's changed? Something's changed. So, clumped is very, very popular, very common for lots of species. As populations get too big, they tend to move towards a uniform distribution. So now there's even spacing between every member of the population. Uniform is doesn't happen that frequently. It's just not that common. What we're looking at here are penguins. When they concentrate for breeding season, there are so many birds that they're crammed onto small islands or small areas where there's habitat, and the distribution is uniform because they basically, where they're standing is their territory, and there's only a couple feet between each bird because there's just literally so many thousands and thousands and thousands of birds here that they can't say, oh, I'm going to take 200 square feet of this little shoreline for my territory. So when populations get really big, we'll sometimes see them go into uniform distribution or dispersal. Again, it's not a constant. Penguins only do it during the breeding season, and then they go back to their scattered or random dispersal after breeding season's over. Okay, and then that brings us to our third type of dispersal, and this is what we call random. They're scattered. They're wherever. Why do you have dandelions all over your lawn? Because that's where the seeds landed and they germinated and boom, there we go. They're surviving in those areas. So again, please remember, these are not fixed. There's constant movement between the different patterns, and there's no standard. It's not like clumped always goes to uniform and then down to random. It could go from clumped to uniform, back up to clumped, or clumped to uniform to random, back to uniform, back to random, back to clumped. There's no fixed prediction of how these, or fixed pattern of how these things will occur and how they change over time. It just depends on all those other factors with how these dispersal patterns shift and change over time. All right, so I want you guys to think about a species. What species are you interested in studying? Start looking at these things we're discussing and apply them to your species. That's what I want you to do. So right now, pick out a species And don't say birds. Which bird? Hummingbirds, red-tailed hawk, bald eagle, tufted titmouse, emperor penguin. Pick a species and start looking into these things about your species. Start looking into, okay, what kind of dispersal patterns do they have? What kind of distribution would I expect for those species? And then how do we predict the population size of that species each generation? So with population size, population is, I mean, there's some real basic pieces of information that go into determining this. How many babies are born, plus how many individuals move in, so plus, and then what's your population right now? So you add those to the existing population, here's your number. But then you do have to factor in how many individuals die, so let's subtract that out, and how many individuals leave, subtract that out. And then here's next year's expected number. Now, is your population going up? Is your population going down? Those are the things population ecologists want to be able to understand. Department of Natural Resources in Illinois does this every single year for deer. They look at how many deer are born on average, because they can't go out and count, but on average, how many babies do we expect to see? Are deer moving into Illinois? Not necessarily. Maybe in the edge of the state, they become part of the Illinois herd. How many deer will die across the year in Illinois from disease, from predators, from cars, from hunters, etc.? And then how many deer might leave the state? And they're estimating this is what the deer herd in Illinois will be next year. This is what we expect the population to be next year. Okay, let's check it. Let's go next year. Let's measure the population. Let's do surveys. Let's do counts and so on. And what we're trying to do with certain species is maintain an ideal population size, one that the environment can support. But to do population ecology, we will use a very, very important tool to understand population ecology. And for everybody interested in this, this tool or this information is critical to be able to actually accurately understand your species. We need to know what's called the life history of the species. So life history, get back up there. Oop. Okay, let me get the bold off of that. All right, so the life history is, or is characterized as the traits that influence the reproduction and survival of your species. So let's start expanding this out. What will influence the reproduction of my species? Start with how many females are in your population? What are the age groups of your population? Are there predators, disease, parasites, etc.? Habitat, food. Get the idea? All these factors come into the picture when we're studying the life history of a population or of a species and trying to determine what's going to happen next year with that population. So if I want the population to grow, I'm trying to bring back an endangered species and improve the population size, I need to know this. If I'm trying to get rid of a parasite, a disease, a thing I hate, I don't like those tapeworms, I need to understand this as well. We'll get into this more in the next lecture.